Imagine you're standing at the edge of a massive, terrifying canyon, and your job is to build a bridge.
Okay.
But this isn't just any bridge, right? This structure needs to carry all of human civilization into the next millennium. So you have to hire a team to build it, and you're faced with a choice.
Right.
Would you hire a team that brings in like a dozen brilliant philosophers to argue about what the bridge should represent or what values it embodies and how people might feel crossing it?
I mean, probably not.
Right. Or would you hire a team of engineers who just ignore the philosophy entirely, look at the cold, undeniable laws of gravity, and build something that physically cannot collapse under its own weight?
Phrased that way, it kind of feels like a trick question,
It totally is.
because most of us, especially when we talk about the future of humanity, we instinctively want to focus on the philosophy. Like we want to talk about our values and the meaning behind our survival.
Yeah, of course we do.
But gravity doesn't really negotiate with our moral intentions. A bridge holds or it falls based entirely on its physical structure.
And that profound tension between our moral intentions and raw physical reality, that is the entire focus of today's deep dive.
It's a fascinating one.
It really is. We are going through a single, incredibly thought-provoking essay by Elias Kunis called The Last Step.
Yeah.
And it is basically a direct structural critique of a massive 2025 framework proposed by the philosopher William MacAskill, which was titled Better Futures.
Right, which was hugely influential.
Exactly. MacAskill's work is arguably the blueprint for how a lot of influential people currently think about, protecting the long-term future.
Yeah, the whole long-termism movement.
Right. But Kunis argues that this blueprint is fundamentally flawed. Like, he is challenging us to stop arguing over which moral theory is the most good and start looking at the laws of thermodynamics to guarantee our survival.
It's a total paradigm shift.
It's a complete reframing of how we think about saving the world. So to understand why Kunis wants to, tear up the current blueprint, we first have to look at what MacAskill actually built in Better Futures.
Yeah, we have to start with the problem MacAskill is trying to solve, which is this very specific, terrifying concept called value lock-in.
Let's define that for everyone because it's a chilling concept.
It really is.
Value lock-in is this idea that humanity might develop the technological power to permanently enforce one specific set of values long before we actually have the wisdom to know if those values are the right ones.
Exactly. Like, imagine if the ancient Romans had possessed advanced AI or, global surveillance.
Oh, wow.
Right. They might have permanently locked in a society that believed gladiator death matches and imperial conquest were the absolute peak of moral achievement.
And we would all just be trapped in that framework today.
We'd be stuck.
Yeah.
So MacAskill wants to avoid that Roman scenario at all costs. And his solution is to aim for a civilizational state he calls viatopia.
Viatopia. Oh, yeah.
Viatopia isn't a blueprint for a perfect utopia with a strict set of laws. It's more like a state of preserved optionality.
Like keeping our options open.
Yep, exactly. It's a condition where existential risk, so the chance of humanity just wiping itself out, is kept extremely low, which allows many different possible futures and moral viewpoints to remain open and to flourish.
So it's essentially a massive civilizational holding pattern.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Like we just stay safe while we figure things out.
Uh-huh.
And to figure out how we achieve this viatopia, MacAskill introduces an equation for the expected value of the future.
The famous S times F equation.
Right, S times F. So the expected value equals surviving, meaning the probability we avoid a civilizational catastrophe multiplied by flourishing.
Right.
Which is the expected value of the civilization, assuming we actually do survive.
And that equation, it seems incredibly intuitive.
It does.
But Kunis looks at S multiplied by F, and he identifies a massive physical error.
Okay, what is it?
He argues that thermodynamics tells us S and F are not independent variables.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you cannot put survival and flourishing into two separate conceptual buckets and then just multiply them together. In physical reality, they are the exact same phenomenon, just viewed from two different angles.
I need to pause on that because on the surface, they sound like entirely different things.
Sure.
Let's ground this in reality. Survival, that sounds like deflecting the asteroid or maintaining the energy grid or stopping the next global pandemic.
The bare minimum.
Right, the bare minimum required to keep the lights on. Flourishing sounds like the reward for staying alive.
Like art and culture.
Exactly. It's writing symphonies, advancing theoretical physics, building these diverse cultures. How can avoiding an asteroid be the exact same physical phenomenon as painting a masterpiece.
Well, it all comes down to how complex systems handle the forces of entropy.
Okay.
Entropy, just in the simplest terms, is the universe's tendency to move toward disorder and decay. Everything falls apart eventually.
Right, the coffee gets cold, mountains erode.
Exactly. So to fight entropy, a system needs a buffer. It needs surplus capacity to handle completely unpredictable shocks. And Kunis points to the historical example of Sparta to really illustrate this.
Oh, the Spartans. Okay.
Yeah. Sparta was a society that decided to optimize purely for bare survival.
Right, they were basically a giant military camp.
Exactly. They looked at their civilization and they purposefully stripped away the art, the deep philosophical inquiry, the economic diversity, basically all the things we might put in the flourishing bucket.
Because they thought it was just dead weight.
Right. They wanted a hardened, perfectly efficient survival machine.
But by doing that, they actually made themselves incredibly fragile.
They completely destroyed themselves. I mean, by stripping away their cultural and economic diversity to optimize for this really narrow definition of survival, Sparta eliminated the very surplus capacity that survival actually requires in a chaotic universe.
Wow.
So when a new, unpredictable shock hit them like a shift in the geopolitical landscape, or even just a novel military tactic from an enemy, they lacked the internal diversity to adapt.
Their rigid efficiency just became their fatal flaw.
Exactly. Flourishing isn't a luxury you get to enjoy after you've secured your survival.
Right.
The art, the diverse viewpoints, the theoretical sciences, that massive, seemingly inefficient surplus, that is the safety margin.
Wait, so, okay, art and culture aren't the reward for surviving. They are the armor.
Yes.
S times F is mathematically flawed because you can't multiply a thing by itself.
Exactly.
Sustained flourishing is the structural buffer that creates survival.
You've got it.
But if the physics of complex systems makes this so obvious, why did a philosopher as brilliant as MacAskill separate them in the first place?
Well, this is where Kunis becomes a sort of intellectual detective. He actually traces this error back to a 200-year-old blind spot. He says MacAskill built his entire S times F equation on a foundational axiom that he inherited but never actually questioned. And Kunis refers to it as the zombie axiom.
A zombie axiom. A dead idea that just keeps walking around infecting our math.
Exactly.
I want to trace the origin of this virus because it dictates so much of our modern world. Kunis calls it ontological individualism.
Ontological individualism, yeah. It's this deeply entrenched belief that the individual sentient being is the only fundamental unit of reality that matters morally.
The individual is everything.
Right. If you trace the genealogy of this idea, patient zero is Jeremy Bentham, right around 1789.
Okay, 1789.
Bentham famously declared that the community is just a fictitious body and that only the individual is actually real.
Huh.
And then, in 1874, Henry Sidgwick cemented the idea that the distinction between individual people is the only fundamental truth in ethics.
And this virus didn't stay in the 19th century either. I mean, in 1975, Peter Singer expanded it to include animals.
Right.
He argued that individual sentience, just the pure capacity to suffer or feel pleasure, is the only metric that matters, completely ignoring the structural health of entire species or ecosystems.
Just the individual experience.
Right. And we see this operationalized today in how we try to, do good in the world. Think about when you decide to donate $50 to a global charity. You probably look at an evaluator like GiveWell.
GiveWell is the perfect modern manifestation of the zombie axiom.
How so?
Well, they measure the impact of your $50 using metrics like QALO-wise.
Quality-adjusted life years.
Exactly, or well-wise. They literally assign a mathematical score to human experience.
Like an actual number.
Yeah. A year of perfect health might be a 1.0, and a year with a debilitating disease might be, say, a 0.4.
Wow.
The entire spreadsheet is constructed with individuals as the rows and interventions as the columns. The momentary experience of the individual is literally the only thing being counted.
That is wild.
Institutions, cultural systems, or the structural health of a civilization, they simply do not exist on that spreadsheet unless they immediately produce a measurable uptick in an individual's numerical score.
Which leads us to the holy text of this movement, right?
Right.
Derek Parfit's 1984 book, Reasons and Persons.
Yeah.
Parfit took this individualist focus to its absolute extreme and basically completely demolished the concept of the individual self.
He tore it apart.
He argued there is no enduring you. The self is just a convenient illusion, a convention, kind of like the borders of a country.
Yeah.
You are just a stream of discrete, disconnected experiences over time.
And Parfit's demolition of the self didn't destroy the spreadsheet, it actually perfected it.
Oh.
By dissolving the self into a stream of tiny experiences, philosophers were suddenly free to just aggregate these atoms of pleasure and pain across billions of people without having to worry about the messy reality of actual human lives.
Just raw data points.
Right. But Kunis identifies the fatal flaw in Parfit's logic here. Parfit went subpersonal. He drilled down, breaking humanity into microscopic fragments of experience.
Yeah.
But he never went super personal.
You never looked up.
Exactly. He never asked if the self-maintaining process, the civilization itself, the structural system that generates and protects those experiences in the first place, might actually be the necessary level of analysis.
Look, I need to push back here because this is where the theory gets highly uncomfortable.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this.
I grew up in a Western democracy. My entire worldview is built on the idea that the individual is sacred.
Absolutely.
So when Kunis suggests we need to stop focusing on the individual and start measuring the health of the superpersonal system, alarm bells go off.
For good reason.
Right. Even Kunis himself admits that individualism has been our anti-totalitarian firewall. The 20th century showed us exactly what happens when we subordinate individual lives to the health of some grand abstract system.
Millions of people die.
Millions of people are sent to gulags. So how can Kunis call individualism a zombie axiom when it is the very concept keeping us from authoritarian nightmares?
It's a completely fair question. And the discomfort you are feeling is exactly why this axiom has survived for 2 centuries. The fear of the gulag is totally justified.
Okay.
But we have to separate ideological collectivism from physical systems theory.
What's the difference?
Collectivism treats the individual as disposable meat for the machine, right? It assumes the state is everything and the person is nothing. Kunis is not advocating for that at all.
Okay, so what is he saying?
He is grounding his argument in the physical requirements of deep time. If you want a complex system to survive the relentless forces of entropy, physics demands that the system possess diverse processing nodes.
Meaning individual minds acting freely, disagreeing, experimenting.
Exactly. Think back to Sparta.
Right.
Totalitarian monocultures like fascist states or gulag systems, they attempt to perfectly align every individual to one single goal. But by doing so, they wipe out their internal diversity.
They destroy their ability to think and adapt.
Right, they destroy their capacity to process new information.
Yeah.
According to Thermodynamics, totalitarianism physically self-destructs.
Wow.
Valuing the health of the system physically requires valuing the empowered, diverse individuals within it, because those individuals are the mechanism of adaptation.
I see.
So the flaw of the zombie axiom isn't that it cares about individuals. The flaw is treating civilizations merely as empty, disposable containers for momentary experiences, rather than recognizing that the container itself is a living process that has to be structurally maintained.
So it's not sacrifice the individual to save the system.
No.
It's a realization that you cannot have a lasting system without empowered, diverse individuals.
Exactly.
But you still have to measure the structural integrity of the system itself, not just the momentary happiness of the people inside it.
Right. And because MacAskill is trapped by his individual-only spreadsheet, he doesn't have the philosophical tools to value the system itself. So he tries to protect the future using a philosophical workaround called moral uncertainty.
Moral uncertainty. Okay, let's break that down. MacAskill looks at the deep future and realizes we just don't know which moral theory is actually correct.
We have no idea.
Maybe maximizing QALYs is right. Maybe a form of egalitarianism is right. Maybe it's something we haven't even conceptualized yet.
Right.
Because we are uncertain, he argues, we should hedge our bets. We should just try to preserve all options until we figure it out.
It's like packing for a trip where you don't know the destination.
Yeah. You pack a swimsuit for the beach, a parka for the tundra, and a tuxedo for a gala. You're hedging your bets to preserve your options.
But that packing strategy works in theory, right?
Right.
Out in the real world, Kunis argues that this hesitant hedge is incredibly fragile.
Why?
Well, what happens when moral uncertainty meets actual operational pressure? MacAskill is advocating for a gentle, hesitant approach. Let's preserve options because we aren't sure. But he is competing against actors with very confident metrics. He is up against spreadsheet maximizers who want to convert all resources into QALYs right now, or worse, confident authoritarian regimes that know exactly what reality they want to enforce.
Oh, I see.
In a crisis, a hesitant, Let's keep our options open. Philosophy will always be crushed by confident, directional action.
So, if hedging our moral bets fails under pressure, Kunis must be proposing a framework that doesn't rely on morality at all.
He is. Kunis offers a physical alternative to moral uncertainty called instrumental convergence.
Instrumental convergence.
Yeah. This is a concept borrowed from the artificial intelligence alignment community, formulated by thinkers like Steve Omohundro and Nick Bostrom.
Okay.
The theory states that any sufficiently intelligent agent, regardless of its ultimate terminal goals, will converge on certain basic behaviors.
Right, because if you program an AI to calculate pi to a billion digits, or if you program it to, I don't know, bake the perfect cake, it still needs electricity to function. And it will actively resist being turned off. Self-preservation and resource acquisition are instrumentally required for literally any goal.
Yep.
But wait, those are theories designed to predict the behavior of rogue algorithms? How does that map onto human society?
Well, human civilization is itself a complex agent operating in a physical universe.
Okay.
Kunis argues we must apply instrumental convergence to ourselves. It doesn't matter what your moral theory is, whether you value art or equality or sheer pleasure. Physics constrains what any civilization needs to persist.
Right.
To survive, a civilization must maintain its capacity to pump out entropy, and it must defend its capital stocks.
Let's clarify pumping out entropy for a moment, because that sounds highly theoretical.
Sure.
In the real world, this is just municipal infrastructure, right? A city has to constantly bring in clean energy, organize it to build structures and feed people, and then physically pump out the resulting waste and heat.
Exactly.
If the sewage system fails or the power grid collapses, entropy takes over and the city decays.
That is exactly what it looks like. And managing that energy flow requires a strong physical structure, returning to your luggage analogy.
Yeah, the swimsuit and the parka.
Right. Moral uncertainty is packing the swimsuit, parka, and tuxedo. Instrumental convergence is the realization that, regardless of the destination, the baggage handler is thermodynamics.
Ah.
Thermodynamics doesn't care about your wardrobe. If the hinges on your suitcase are weak, your belongings are getting scattered across the tarmac.
Wow.
The structural integrity of the suitcase isn't a fashion choice. It is a physical boundary condition of travel.
Which means we are crossing a major philosophical line here. We are crossing the famous is-ought gap.
Yes, we are.
For you listening who might not be familiar with that, the philosopher David Hume established this rule centuries ago. You cannot derive a moral ought. What we should do from a physical up is a description of physical reality.
The golden rule of philosophy.
Right. But Kunis is breaking that rule. He's saying that persistence isn't a moral theory you can debate at a dinner party. If you don't exist physically, you can't have an ought.
Kunis absolutely crosses the is-ought gap, and he does it unapologetically.
Good for him.
Yeah. If a civilization structure cannot pump entropy and maintain its safety margin, it collapses. Period. This forces a massive fork in the road for how we think about the future. It's a shift from what Kunis calls the rationalist tradition to the mechanist ontology.
The rationalist tradition being MacAskill's approach.
Exactly.
Rationalists build these incredibly beautiful, internally consistent, logical castles in the sky. They formalize logic and optimize for perfect reasoning, but they build these castles on top of unchecked axioms, like the zombie axiom of individualism.
Which we now know is flawed.
Right. The mechanist approach is entirely different.
The mechanist ontology is grounded in one specific commitment. Mechanisms are real, intentions are not.
Okay.
We must study what systems actually do, not what they say.
Like, don't listen to the PR department.
Exactly. A society might tell itself a beautiful story about valuing democracy, human rights, and moral progress. But a mechanist ignores the story and looks at the causal architecture. What does the physical structure of the society actually produce?
Right.
The rationalist asks, is this formalization logically consistent? The mechanist asks, does this physical process collapse under its own weight?
This clarifies Kunis's ultimate conclusion about MacAskill's work. MacAskill basically built the right telescope.
Yes.
He looked deep into the future and correctly identified the threats. He saw the need for viatopia, the danger of value lock-in, and the vital importance of protecting our possibility space.
He got the diagnosis right.
But when he looked through that telescope, he used the wrong lens. He used the fragile lens of moral uncertainty when he needed the unbreakable lens of thermodynamics.
That is the absolute core of the critique. But it is important to note that the mechanist framework isn't entirely devoid of values.
Oh, it isn't.
No, it actually makes one fundamental normative commitment. It commits to the idea of sustained syntropy.
Sustained syntropy.
Yeah. Syntropy is the opposite of entropy. It is the process of building complexity out of chaos. It is the plant turning sunlight into leaves. It is a civilization turning raw elements into quantum computers.
Okay.
Kunis argues that more aliveness, the continued generation of complexity, is preferable to less aliveness.
But once you make that single wager on aliveness, the rest is just engineering. Kunis is telling us that the proliferation of complex systems, our art, our divergent political viewpoints, our bizarre cultural experiments, isn't just a flavor of morality you can choose.
Nope.
It is what survival actually looks like when subjected to the ultimate filter of the universe.
Exactly.
MacAskill treats the flourishing of civilization as a maybe. Maybe it's valuable, so let's hedge our bets and preserve it. Kunis says it's not a maybe. Flourishing is the ground truth. It is the exact safety margin required by physics.
It fundamentally shifts the entire foundation of long-termism from a philosophical debate into a structural, physical imperative.
Let's pull all of this together because we've dismantled a lot of deeply held beliefs
We
today.
really have.
We started with MacAskill's noble attempt to save the future by hedging our moral bets. We tracked down the 200-year-old zombie axiom of individualism from Jeremy Bentham all the way to modern charity spreadsheets that basically blinded us to the health of the systems that actually sustain us.
Right.
We confronted the very real fear that moving past the individual leads to authoritarianism, only to realize that physics literally punishes dictatorships for crushing diversity.
Thermodynamics hates dictators.
Exactly. And finally, we arrived at a physical truth. Flourishing isn't a luxury. It is the exact safety margin required to survive thermodynamics.
The philosophical bridge has essentially been replaced by an engineering schematic.
And for you, listening right now, this isn't just an abstract debate about the year 3000. You make decisions every day.
Every single day.
When you vote, when you donate money, when you support a corporate policy, you are making choices based on what you believe is morally good. But Kunis challenges you to ask a radically different question. Do the systems you are supporting actually possess the structural mechanisms to persist over time? Or are they just running on good intentions while the physical foundation rots?
That is the crucial takeaway. And it really leaves us with an unsettling question about our present moment.
What's that?
Well, if our civilization's flourishing, our massive, seemingly inefficient surplus of diversity and culture is actually our necessary safety margin against collapse.
Okay.
Look closely at the global systems we rely on today.
Okay.
Look at our hyper-optimized supply chains, our algorithmic management, our obsession with converting every aspect of human life into a measurable, hyper-efficient individual metric.
Oh, wow.
In our relentless drive to optimize the present, are we behaving exactly like Sparta?
That is terrifying.
Are we quietly, systematically stripping away the very surplus complexity we are going to need to survive the next great, unpredictable shock?
Are we so busy arguing about the philosophy of the bridge that we're ignoring the cracks forming in the concrete? That is a thought that should change how you look at the world tomorrow morning. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.